August 2016, and Ellie had been particularly looking forward to the trip as she was going to play a key role in her grandmother's wedding.
Ellie was really excited to go on the holiday. We'd had it planned for a year and she was going to be bridesmaid.
It was the furthest that the family had flown together, and with 2 children under 5, Mum Sophie was key to get the right insurance. She searched on comparison websites and eventually plumped for a policy with the company Insure4.com, paying £22.42 for a single-trip economy policy, which included free cover for the children.
It was one of the cheapest then. It seemed good value for money because it had a high level of cover. So if anything did go wrong, I know I'd be covered.
With everything booked and travel insurance secured, all the family had to do was look forward to jetting off.
We were all so excited. We'd paid for it the year before, so we had a full year of waiting for the holiday and the lead up to it with the wedding and all the family going. Well, just couldn't wait to go.
And when they arrived, everything seemed just what they'd hoped for.
Our hotel was lovely. Ellie loved the pool and the little kids' disco on the night.
But 4 days into the trip, Ellie started to feel unwell. Sophie initially thought it was just a reaction to the change in water.
Ellie had stomach cramps, she was in a lot of pain. I was just hoping it was a tummy bug and everything was going to be all right.
But it soon became clear that it was something far more serious.
She was throwing up bright green sick, temperature she wouldn't eat, so we realised there was something more to it.
As Ellie's condition deteriorated, the family took her to see the hotel doctor.
He felt around her stomach and he noticed it was the right side, so he suspected it was appendicitis and he recommended we get an ambulance.
The family was rushed to the nearest hospital, but as is common in this kind of situation in foreign hospitals, before the doctor would even see Ellie, let alone treat her, the family was hit with a demand for cash.
My partner went into the hospital and he came back and said we needed £2,000 for Ellie to be seen, and that was just to get into the hospital. It was a sense of panic at first. I felt just I needed to get her seen, so I went into the hospital and rang the insurance.
Hoping that securing payment from Insure4.com was just a formality, Sophie was surprised when the company said they'd have to call her back, and the insurers couldn't give any idea of when that might be.
At this point, Ellie was screaming in the waiting room in agony, and her dad had broke down crying. He just wanted to get her seen. So I was ringing the insurance all the time, just trying to get them to see how critical she was.
Every moment was critical, but the minutes turned into hours and there was still no positive response from Insure4.com. So Sophie and her partner Christopher decided they couldn't wait any longer and found the money themselves.
My partner's mum put it on a credit card. She said just pay it, she needs to be seen, so we just did it.
The credit card authorisation gave the green light for initial tests while the hospital waited for the insurer to confirm cover. Ellie had an ultrasound scan and an X-ray which confirmed that she had appendicitis and needed emergency surgery. But the hospital said the only way the operation could be carried out was if it received confirmation that someone would pay the cost, which amounted to over £10,000. And again, to Sophie's horror, a prompt answer from her insurer wasn't forthcoming.
I was ringing them every 10 minutes, telling them, look, she's in and out of consciousness. This is urgent, you need to get her down. And my partner was really upset. Insurance just didn't understand. I tried to tell them on the phone how critical she was and they just didn't care.
Now, the insurer would argue that behind the scenes it was working hard to get the family the answer it needed. But it's easy to see that miles from home, with her daughter's health on the line, it didn't look that way to Sophie, especially when Ellie took a turn for the worse and her appendix actually burst.
I was so scared in a different country watching her in that state and knowing I couldn't do anything but wait for the insurance to answer. At one point I thought, my daughter might die here. If they don't pay out, we haven't got the funds to pay for this. What are we going to do? That was my main worry after sitting in that hospital for 9 hours. Will she come through and make it at the other end? Will I lose her?
Sophie says it was only after the Mexican surgeon himself got on the phone to the insurers, stressing the urgency of the situation, that the company was able to finally confirm it would come up with the cash.
It was like a manic rush once they said she could have the go-ahead for the surgery. The surgeons rushed in and they had her up in the theatre straight away. It was such a relief.
The surgery was a success and Ellie was admitted to intensive care. But to the family's dismay, the insurer then said it still wasn't able to confirm whether it would cover the hospital's aftercare following the operation.
The insurance had confirmed that they'd pay for her operation, but they hadn't confirmed they would pay for her care there afterwards.
Ellie was discharged after 2 days in hospital, at which point Sophie says they were hit with a bill for around £4,000, which appeared to be for her care after the operation. But I'm afraid even that wasn't the end of it. Just 2 days later, Ellie was rushed back into hospital after contracting an infection. And to Sophie, it didn't seem that Insure4.com was in any rush to confirm it would cover the costs of her treatment this time either.
And we were back in square one what we were in when we first went. They treated her for an infection. They treated her without us paying anybody, but once we got discharged, we had to pay again on a credit card.
Now, the insurer did guarantee that it would pick up that cost, which came to around a further £6,000. But Sophie and her family had to guarantee the full sum on their own credit card just in case. So by now, Sophie says they had undertaken to pay out around £12,000 for Ellie's treatment, which they'd only been able to do thanks to the help of generous friends and family. And although there was some confusion over the total costs, with prices quoted in US dollars, Mexican pesos and British pounds, Sophie knew this could leave her family seriously out of pocket.
I felt really guilty on the other family members that they'd had to put their personal money on a credit card just for us to get out of a hospital.
Though relieved that Ellie was free to return to the UK, the couple were distraught at the thousands of pounds of credit card payments they'd been forced to authorise in Mexico. And their worries only got worse when, 11 days after they returned home, the hospital emailed Sophie to say it was still pursuing the insurer for payment, and it suggested she chase up the company too, to avoid that £12,000 coming off her and her family's own cards.
My partner was querying, should we sell our car, should we sell our house? Where else would we find the money from? That was our only options, really.
Well, luckily it didn't come to that, because shortly afterwards, Insure4.com did pay out and settled the bill for all of Ellie's hospital treatment. But Sophie remains upset at why, throughout all of this, they'd had what she considered such a slow response from the insurance company. As far as she's concerned, the insurer made a traumatic situation many times worse, and she still can't understand why, in an emergency like this, an answer can't be given right away.
If they'd have made that decision quicker, we wouldn't have had to go through Ellie's appendix bursting and then having to fight off an infection and being taken back into hospital.
So how quickly should you expect to get a response from your travel insurance provider? Well, personal finance expert Sarah Pennell says that while every second counts in an emergency, perhaps surprisingly, there's no set time frame within which insurers have to agree to send payment.
I think you're in a very difficult situation if you find yourself in the circumstances that Ellie's parents were. There aren't actually any hard and fast rules that say a time limit by which an insurer should deal with a claim. And of course, in Ellie's case, sort of hours mattered. All you can do really is to make your voice heard as loudly as possible and to make sure that the people at the top of the company know this issue, because sometimes people who are in the call centres aren't actually allowed to make decisions that to you and I might seem to be common sense.
Well, we asked Insure4.com to explain why it took so long to make a decision on Ellie's care, especially given the critical nature of the situation. It told us that while it was sorry to hear of the situation and delighted that Ellie's made a full recovery, it worked with several third parties to establish a confirmed diagnosis of the condition and an understanding of the treatment required. Once the written paperwork and key authorizations were received, it did give the go-ahead for surgery, and subsequently, after a full and thorough review of the family's policy, covered the cost of the rest of the treatment. The company went on to stress that it always aims to deal with customers in the shortest time possible, and though it works with third parties to administer and underwrite its policies, it takes full responsibility for the regulation and administration of those policies to ensure that they're fit for purpose and meet the needs of customers. We also contacted the Association of British Insurers, which told us its members understand the need to respond quickly when someone needs urgent treatment, and it's not in the insurer's or customer's interest for treatment to be unnecessarily delayed. It says in an emergency situation, insurers will generally give the go-ahead on a presumption there is cover in place, keeping in regular contact with the policyholder, their immediate family and the medical facility overseas to ensure treatment goes ahead as soon as possible. Of course, as we've seen, things may not always be that simple. So Sarah Pennells has this advice when choosing the right insurance policy for your next holiday.
My advice is to look really carefully at the cover you get with your travel insurance, and also to do some research into how well and quickly the insurance company pays out. Most people, we've got better things to do than to spend time buying travel insurance, and we tend to go for the cheapest option, but it may not be the right one for you. And if you need to make a claim on your insurance policy, you want to know that it will be there and it will pay out when you need.
In the meantime, though Sophie is trying to concentrate on the good memories of the holiday, she can't forget the enormous stress that trying to contact her insurer caused.
From us getting to the hospital to getting an answer from the insurance for the go-ahead for the operation, we waited 9 hours. I paid that money for the insurance thinking everything would be okay.
When something goes wrong whilst you're away on holiday, it's quite a natural reaction to want to find someone to take responsibility. But very often, it's quite hard to establish exactly who that might be. And that's, of course, at the root of an awful lot of the stories that you send to us. But some of you have come across a very specific reason why it can be a particular problem when you've been on a cruise. And it means that if the trip itself wasn't plain sailing, I'm afraid getting things resolved may not turn out to be any better. Last year, 24 million passengers hopped on board a cruise ship, and the industry employs over 900,000 people, meaning that on any given day, thousands of people are at sea aboard these huge floating cities. And to keep up with demand, 27 new ships have hit the seas in 2016 alone. But one ship that certainly isn't new is the Marco Polo. It was built in 1965 and has been through several owners and numerous renovations since. It's currently operated by Cruise and Maritime Voyages, a UK-based company, and as can be seen from this promotional video, a trip on the Marco Polo is definitely one to remember.
So why not experience a cruise and maritime voyage for yourself? We'll make you very welcome.
And it was a slice of the ship's luxury that appealed to Judy and Graham Sexton from Lincolnshire. They've a lifelong love of boats, but in their retirement, fancied handing over the controls to the captain of the Marco Polo on a 5-week cruise.
We were really looking forward to the trip because the venues were fantastic. Unusual, some of them. Greenland, 3 places in Greenland, the Faroes, parts of Canada that we'd never been to.
Oh, thanks.
Okay.
But the couple didn't find the cruise quite as enjoyable as they'd hoped. The Marco Polo, now in its 52nd year, was due a bit of TLC and was being painted when Graham and Judy boarded the ship. And Graham says one of the products being used began to cause him some problems.
The fumes were so strong that I had to hold my breath coming down the gangway because there was about 3 or 4 people painting the boat, and the fumes were absolutely horrendous.
They were painting all the rails, they were varnishing all the stairs.
Graham says the fumes were so bad they even began to affect his breathing, so he paid a visit to the ship's doctor.
One of the big concerns was Graham has asthma. The fumes were so seriously strong that it makes you feel not well, it affects your breathing, and I was extremely concerned.
In fact, the couple considered the fumes so bad, they even wondered if they could carry on with the trip.
By the time we got to Montreal, it was just about halfway through the holiday. We'd come to the decision, sadly, that we were most probably going to have to leave and fly home.
However, to their relief, after making their concerns known to the crew, they were moved to a different part of the ship.
We were moved into another cabin, which wasn't quite as large as the one we had, but it actually did move us onto another deck, which improved. The paint fumes weren't as bad on that deck. And sitting there while they're painting.
But they couldn't escape them completely, and Graham and Judy say painters continued working in public areas throughout the trip. When they got back home, Graham decided to put in a complaint to the company operating Marco Polo, Cruise and Maritime Voyages.
I wrote to the company, and initially I thought I was getting a sympathetic ear.
The company responded to Graham saying it was looking into the matter further. But after some more correspondence, it ultimately concluded that all the relevant rules had been followed. So, not content with that, Graham decided to see if he could get someone else to take his complaint on board. However, working out just who that should be wasn't immediately obvious.
I contacted the Port of London Authority for advice. They said you should try the country of registration of the ship, because the country of registration of the ship are responsible for what happens on that ship.
So in this case, it didn't really matter that Cruise and Maritime Voyages has its headquarters in the UK. The key factor was the country where the ship was registered, and it's usually that country's rules which apply on board. And in this case, that was 4,000 miles away from Graham, in the Bahamas.
I wrote a letter to them pointing out what had happened, the problems on board, all that sort of thing, and I never got a reply even.
Whilst writing to the Bahamian authorities about a cruise ship company with its headquarters in Essex might sound a little odd. In fact, it's not all that uncommon. Because, though you may never have realised it, most cruise ships operate under what's known as a flag of convenience, which means they're officially registered in a country that's perhaps miles away from where you might assume they were based, as Mark Watson from Tourism Concern explains.
Flags of convenience are used by the shipping industry to register their ships in countries other than the country that they come from. So a UK-operated cruise ship, for instance, can register under Liberia regulations, the Bahamas, the Marshall Islands, even Mongolia, which is a landlocked state. And then the ship is controlled by the regulations of that country. So things like employment rights, health and safety, and all legal rights for consumers are governed by the rules of the flag country rather than the home country.
So that means any problems you might have relating to a ship's upkeep, structure, or, as with Graham, its maintenance, will be subject to the laws of the flag state, in this case the Bahamas, and not those of the country where its parent company is based. And whilst there's nothing to suggest that any of this would have an effect on how the Marco Polo was being maintained, Mark says it does mean that establishing which country's rules a ship is legally bound by may prove more difficult than you'd expect.
Flags of convenience first came around in the 50s, where many American companies registered in Panama to avoid US regulations, and that still applies now. The cruise ship companies register in countries with very poor regulations, so it cuts down the costs for them and the red tape, and they only have to operate by the regulations of that country, which quite often has very poor labour standards, very poor health and safety standards, and very poor legal regulations around operating a cruise ship.
Now, there's no suggestion that cruise and maritime voyages, or any of the best-known cruise companies for that matter, are cutting corners or ducking their responsibilities by registering their ships in this way. In fact, there are plenty of reasons why a ship might be registered in another country, not least, for example, so that it can hold a wedding at sea, which is illegal under British rules, but not those of some other countries. However, chances are a lot of cruise passengers simply hadn't realised that some of the biggest names in the industry register their vessels in places they perhaps did not expect. Take, for instance, Southampton-based P&O Cruises. Most of its ships are registered in Bermuda, including their oldest liner, the Oriana. The brand new Carnival Vista, jewel in the crown of Carnival Cruises, along with the rest of Carnival's fleet, is registered in Panama. Cruise legend Cunard, considered by many a British institution, now also registers all of its ships in Bermuda. And Scandinavian-sounding Norwegian Cruise Line registers most of its ships more than 4,000 miles away from Norway in the Bahamas, just like the Marco Polo. Even so, if you do have a complaint about a cruise, you'd hope that whatever laws its owners appear to be bound by, they'd still want to put it right.
If something goes wrong on a cruise ship, then the first point of call would be the cruise ship company themselves, and that would be the best chance of getting anything resolved. The difficulty is if you need to escalate it further there, is where do you go? If the cruise ship don't address the issue, there are very few other places to go, particularly to do that.
But I'm pleased to say that when, flying the Rip-Off Britain flag, we contacted Cruise and Maritime Voyages about Graham's case, we got a response from its UK office right away, so there was no need to go all round the world looking for answers. The company reiterated that it has fully investigated Graham's concerns, but says it only uses approved indoor and outdoor paints, and that it goes to great lengths to ensure any maintenance operations do not interfere with passengers' enjoyment. It says of the 150,000 passengers it's carried on the Marco Polo, Graham and Judy's is the only complaint it has received regarding paint use on board. What's more, it robustly dismissed any concerns over flags of convenience, saying a ship's flag in no way allows it to avoid very stringent international health and safety standards or consumer protection regulations, pointing out that all cruise ships are subject to international safety regulation coordinated by a dedicated UN agency, the International Maritime Organization. And those operating in the EU must follow extensive safety, sanitation and consumer protection regulation set by the European Union. And while the company has nevertheless apologised for any inconvenience, Graham still feels the situation should never have arisen.
It was a good cruise in many ways, but the paint fumes ruined it. It shouldn't happen. We paid good money for it. We didn't get value for money.
Still to come on Rip-Off Britain, a holiday cut short by a life-changing accident. But whose responsibility is it to put things right?
If that had been me, I wouldn't have been as strong.
Look at that. I used to look at that and think, I'm not going to get out of here.
Our travel expert Simon Calder has all the secrets to save you money on your travels. He's also full of tips on everything, from how to avoid the crowds to the best way to steer clear of those tourist traps and scams. This time Simon is looking at the ever-popular Balearic Islands.
For half a century, the Spanish Isles of Mallorca, Menorca and Ibiza have been among our very favourite holiday destinations. Yet what began as cheap and cheerful islands can sometimes these days be ferociously expensive. So let me help you enjoy the Balearics on a budget.
And the best time to start saving is as soon as you arrive.
Every time I touch down at one of the island's airports, there's a great long line of people queuing up for rental cars, and I walk straight past. The public transport is widespread, efficient and extremely good value.
On Mallorca, for example, for just €5, a bus will get you from Palma Airport into the city centre, where you can join the excellent train network to the rest of the island. From Mahon Airport on neighbouring Menorca, the fare on the number 10 bus into town is €2.65. And the bus from Ibiza Airport is also a number 10, but the fare is a tiny bit higher at €3.50. But if you do decide to forgo public transport and rent a car, picking up the vehicle in the city centre is likely to be cheaper without the airport surcharge.
If there's one thing that might make you sleep a little less soundly in the Balearics, it could be the controversial bed tax introduced in the summer of 2016.
The tax is on a sliding scale from 50 cents per person per night if you're camping or staying in a hostel, to €2 for luxury hotels and upmarket apartments. From 9 nights onwards, the tax is halved and the children under 16 go free. So for example, a couple spending a fortnight at a 4-star apartment will now pay an extra £40 or so at today's exchange rate.
But you can reduce the tax by choosing a lower grade of accommodation, visiting the Balearics between November and March when tax rates are halved, or going somewhere else.
And timing your sightseeing correctly can also save you some cash. Mallorca's Miro Museum on the outskirts of Palma is best seen on a Saturday when it's absolutely free. And on Menorca, just on the way in from the airport, the amazing Cornea Nu, which is an ancient 3,000-year-old watchtower, is another absolutely free attraction. But do check the opening times as they vary during the week. Best of all, in generous Ibiza, Mace, the fabulous museum of contemporary art, is free every single day of the week except Mondays when it's closed.
Finally, why stick to just one island when it's so easy to go Spanish island hopping?
Each of the biggest islands has a very different vibe, so do check the sailing times and don't limit yourself to just one of the Balearics. You could squeeze in 2, or you never know, maybe all 3. Now, as you know, every year we have our pop-up shop. It's a drop-in advice clinic where you can share your experiences with us and, most important of all, our experts, and it's all done face-to-face. Well, last time around, I heard one story that really did stick in my mind, and not just because of the dramatic results involved, but what struck me about it the most was the way it underlines how important it can be when things go wrong, to have somebody acknowledge the extent of what you've been through, and really just to properly listen to exactly what has happened. Well, the rest of our team find this particular case especially memorable, so all of us wanted to find out more. As ever, our Rip-Off Britain pop-up shop helped dozens of viewers get an instant resolution to their problem.
Thank you very much.
It's an absolute pleasure to meet you.
We're very grateful for the help we've had.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Isn't he a nice man? Lovely. But when nurses Kate, Linda, Lavinia and Diane came to get some advice from Simon Calder, it was clear that theirs was a problem we were unlikely to be able to resolve there and then. Tell me what happened. Their story started back in March 2014, when the ladies had taken a dream holiday to Cuba. During the holiday, they decided to visit a market nearby, one of the local attractions. And the transport they chose to get there was a traditional horse and trap, which at the welcome meeting, the reps had pointed out could be taken from within the hotel grounds.
So we all had a coffee, changed some money, we're all upbeat and happy, and we just went outside. We were directed to the horse and trap because we asked.
This is right outside your hotel?
It's within the hotel ground. So we climbed aboard and off we went, and within 10 minutes the nightmare began.
After a sudden loud crashing noise, part of the steel harness became detached from the horse. As a result, the cart started to wobble violently, and the panicked horse ran off the road up a steep embankment, dragging the cart and all its passengers along after it. Diane managed to jump out of the trap shortly before it overturned, with the other ladies, I'm afraid, trapped inside. And what state were you all in then? You must have been petrified.
I must have lost consciousness because I don't really remember very much. My arm was fractured in a couple of places, and the cart had actually landed on my pelvis, and it was all fractured and buckled. It was dreadful.
Really dreadful, because the ladies all sustained injuries. With a fractured pelvis and left arm, Linda spent 11 days in a Cuban hospital, where the enormity of having such a serious accident in a foreign country soon hit home.
Just get me home.
Lavinia, Diane's 72-year-old mum, was left with a neck injury, and both she and her friend Kate suffered from concussion. Diane had damage to her right shoulder, elbow and hand. All of them were treated for their injuries in the hospital, but thousands of miles from home, the whole experience was a really traumatic one.
You just want to go home, don't you? I do.
With their holiday totally ruined, as soon as they were well enough, the ladies flew back to the UK, Linda by air ambulance. But their journey to recovery was only just beginning. As nurses with such busy and physically demanding jobs, the impact of their injuries on their lives was even more dramatic. Diane needed 5 months off work and 18 months of physiotherapy. Indeed, she was just recovering from a further operation to remove some bone from her damaged shoulder when she came to see us at the pop-up shop. Lavinia, Diane's mother, suffered headaches, and the accident has left her severely shaken. Kate, who received a blow to the head, has been similarly affected. And for Linda, the injuries she sustained have had such a lasting impact that she was forced to take early retirement from the nursing career she just loved, and she still experiences severe pain from her broken pelvis. Well, I mean, that is just also terrifying, isn't it? And in fact, you brought some photographs. Have a look at these.
Oh, crikey.
So this is obviously Linda in hospital. So, I mean, it's just horrendous. But it's not just the injuries that have had an effect on the ladies. They all feel that the ways in which the incident has been handled by both their tour operator and their various insurers only added to their distress.
What an awful experience for you all, and I understand that it's still causing you a lot of problems today. So let me try to extract the key things here. There you were on a holiday of a lifetime to a beautiful, fascinating, but very poor country, Cuba. You suffer an appalling accident as a result of somebody's negligence. That seems to be fairly clear, but it's also clear that the negligence was committed by somebody who there's no point suing, because even if you can track him down, you're going to find that he's very poor, and therefore you are stuck with possibly talking to your tour operator, who is going to say, at the welcome meeting, we certainly mentioned that these things existed. We did not recommend it, and crucially, we did not sell you that tour. You decided to enter into a contract with the provider of that horse and trap journey, and therefore your issue is with them.
They've already said that.
I'm not surprised.
So having no luck with their travel company, and with any legal action against the horse and cart owner unlikely to succeed, the ladies turned to their insurance companies to see what compensation they might be able to offer for the life-changing injuries they've suffered. Did you have travel insurance for all of you?
I fear the travel insurance will just say, look, all we're doing is providing backup when things go wrong, and if people are going to go off and be adventurous in wonderful countries, sadly things will happen. All we are doing is picking up the pieces afterwards to the extent that we are able to, and unfortunately we're not going to have any kind of long-term responsibility for you for your condition.
Well, only 2 of the ladies received any money from their various insurance companies. Lavinia and Kate received £1,200 each, but Diane and Linda haven't received 1 penny. And in Diane's case, she says that's because her insurers told her they'd only pay out if they thought legal action would end in a successful outcome. And with the horse and cart driver based in Cuba, it didn't seem there was much chance of that one. But although the ladies all feel that they should be able to blame someone or take their case further, Simon can't see that there's anything more they can do, and that news is a bitter blow. What is making you upset? The fact that there seems to be little redress? Is that what's making you upset?
No, it just, the photographs bring it back, and I think to myself, a lovely holiday, my whole life's changed.
I know.
A career I loved has gone.
So sad, and it's clear to see how raw this whole experience has been. So Simon asked Martin James from the Financial Ombudsman Service what he made of how this tricky case had been handled.
One of the things that's really, really important is knowing that you've actually done as much as you can, and at least your voice has been heard. And I get the impression that you've really not been listened to very much.
Only today.
Well, certainly there are lots of restrictions on insurance policies, but the question is, what's the right thing to do here? sometimes insurance companies can be very, very literal, and actually it's just a case of finding somebody in charge to have a look at the whole situation. I'll ask one of our experts if we can look at the cases together and see if we can get the insurance company just to kind of respond to you. And at the very least, we'll make sure your voice is heard.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
A little bit of hope, but what struck me about the ladies' experience was how a fleeting moment on their holiday had so impacted their day-to-day lives. And back at home, away from the bustle of the pop-up shop, it's very clear to see that the women were still coming to terms with what had happened to them.
Just get me home.
If that had been me, I wouldn't have been as strong.
Look at that. I used to look at that and think, I'm not going to get out of here. I've started already.
I know, don't worry then. My life's completely changed.
Even sitting here now, I'm in pain down this side, because I think this is the side where the fractures at the back, one of it buckled, and it's going to be there always. Every time it starts up, I need to do physio.
Now, dreadful as this case is, it's a very useful reminder of the limitations of what